Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1193, 1193, Friday, July the 17th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so I want to pick up here just for a minute on what I was talking about yesterday with Lindsey Graham and his investigators discovering this 40-page memo that is the notes with the top FBI intelligence analyst along with case agent number 1 interviewing Steele's so-called primary sub-source. And of course then I'm going to talk about the Susan Rice testimony. We're going to go through that a little bit. So on this issue with Lindsey Graham, I watched the interview with Sean Hannity, and Lindsey Graham makes a very, very good point that I think a lot of other people have made regarding other documents. But in this particular case, Lindsey Graham really lays out the fact that this particular 40-page memo that he's referring to, that he's read, which was discovered by his investigators, this interview with Steele's subsource, this is truly, I mean, you hear the term smoking gun a lot. This is, and I don't use that term a lot, but this is truly, if there is a smoking gun, this is a big one. Because just as Graham points out in his interview with Hannity, this interview was done over a period of 3 days with the subsource, and it lays out in very, very clear terms, according to Lindsey Graham. That's why he wants this declassified. He said, hey man, if people read this memo, you know, when people read this memo, they're going to see that there was absolutely no doubt whatsoever that this FBI analyst and case agent number 1 that interviewed Steele's subsource put right there in their notes, 40 pages worth, there was absolutely no way that from that point forward that anything should have gone forward regarding the information coming from, allegedly, from Christopher Steele. That this 40-page memo totally blows it totally out of the water. The subsource basically telling them, yeah, I mean, Steele's nuts. I have no idea what he's talking about. Most of that stuff he made up. The stuff he didn't make up is just stuff I told him was barroom talk. It's all just crazy stuff, you know. So Lindsey Graham says that this 40-page memo is just absolutely devastating. And a very good point he makes is that anybody, it's what he said, and I've said similar things to other documents, but this one apparently is the most, probably the most damning set of documents that we may have seen up to this point, according to Lindsey Graham, and that's why he wants it declassified. He says that after reading this 40 pages, anyone who was aware, anyone who read this 40-page memo, if anyone who read that memo, who continued on with the investigations into the Trump campaign or Michael Flynn or anyone else, anyone who continued on with the Russia hoax from that point forward, he essentially says those people should absolutely be in jail. Because there's no doubt, he says, when you read these 40 pages, and hopefully they will be released, and he said they probably will be. Lindsey Graham said it may take a couple of days, but we think that this release is coming. And when it does, and when people read this 40-page memo, it's going to be, you know, curtains for the people who had been either read the memo or had been briefed on the memo, if they were in any way, shape, or form involved with moving forward or even knowing about moving forward with the investigation. Anyone who saw this should have thrown up the red flag and said, no, we can't go on with this investigation, man. You got to read this 40-page memo. It lays out the whole thing. Christopher Steele's, it's a hoax. The whole thing's a hoax. And believe me, has to be quite a few people. I'm pretty sure that Case Agent 1 and this top FBI analyst didn't just keep this to themselves. They certainly would have shared it with the people running Crossfire Hurricane. They certainly would have shared it with people at the DOJ. Certainly would have shared it with, at very least, I would think McCabe. I don't know if it went all the way to Comey, but it certainly would have been shared with McCabe. And as Lindsey Graham says, he wants to call all these people in and ask each and every one of them, did you see or did you receive any briefing on this 40-page memo with the 2 FBI guys with Steele's primary subsource? Did you see that memo, or was you briefed on that memo? And whoever's names those are of the people who have to admit that yes, they saw it, read it, were briefed on it, whatever, those people are in a world of trouble. a world of trouble. Because even if they weren't part of the ones pushing the investigation, because they would have known. I mean, the investigation went forward. We got the Mueller witch hunt. We got the whole 9 yards. There's people who read that memo, including Case Agent 1 and this FBI analyst. They should have been the first two to throw up the red flags and say, wait, stop. Along with everybody else who read that or were briefed on it. Should have stopped it. The Mueller investigation should never have happened. Any more looking into Trump-Russia should have stopped. Nothing should have happened after that. That's what Attorney General Barr was obviously referring to in an interview he did a couple weeks ago when he said the same thing. And I thought he was talking about because of what was in the Horowitz report, or what's come out when Nunes did his report on the FISA on Carter Page. But no, obviously Attorney General Barr was referring to this. He was referring to this 40-page memo, which we can assume that Durham has had for quite some time. So yes, Lindsey Graham's right. Anyone who saw that memo or was briefed on that memo and did not speak up as these investigations move forward, or especially took part in moving this investigation forward. And remember, they didn't just keep this information to themselves. And this document should have been released to the House Intelligence Committee 3 years ago. They've been sitting on it for a very long time. Now, of course, from what we're hearing from Lindsey Graham, we know why. So this again, I don't like to use the term smoking gun a lot, but this is certainly a smoking gun if it is what Graham says it is. And I believe he's telling the truth, because he lays out pretty clearly that it's very damning. So Lindsey Graham says that he expects we are going to get release of this sooner than later, not like years, as in like days. So I'll be very interested in this 40-page memo. Hopefully it'll be released. I'm thinking it could be released maybe this evening, Friday evening. That's usually when they would release something like this, or maybe over the weekend. I don't know who will do this release, whether it's the DOJ or whether it's with the intel community. Probably DOJ, because it's an FBI memo. But that means it would take Barr. Now maybe Durham doesn't want it released for some reason, or maybe they want to redact something in it. I don't know. But hopefully we will see the release of this. And yes, it is very important that Lindsey Graham call in all the players in the small group and the whole general group of people, top people at the FBI and DOJ, and ask them if they saw this memo or were they briefed on this memo. That is something that we'll definitely want to be watching for in the next couple of days to come. And if it's what Lindsey Graham says it is coffin nails. And Durham will have a very tough time not bringing charges very soon afterwards. I mean, this is the problem we have now. There's so much out in the open, in the public domain, that it's pretty clear what happened. And that's why Durham absolutely has to indict people. I think it's just a question of timing, not whether or not he can or will or even wants to. He doesn't really have much choice. There's too many people that know what happened. And so we'll just have to watch and see. But yes, we'll definitely want to see this released, and I'm looking forward to it. Now let's talk about the Susan Rice testimony to Congress. She gave her testimony on September the 8th of 2017. This, of course, is the House Oversight Committee, which you had Goodlatte Gowdy. This particular interview, again, we had Susan Rice being represented by Obama's fixer, Kathleen Rumler, and we had Trey Gowdy doing most of the questioning. There was 2 or 3 other Republicans who did questioning, but it was primarily Gowdy. Again, with all of the people who Rumler represented on behalf of Obama, she did her opening statement where she goes through a long list of things that her so-called client is not going to talk about and all that sort of thing. So we're used to that with Kathleen Rumler taking a lot of things off the table. But from the very beginning of this hearing with Susan Rice, it was pretty testy, particularly the questions and answers between Rice and Trey Gowdy. So clearly Trey Gowdy and Rice do not like each other, because she got very sarcastic with him and he got sarcastic right back. Another thing that about this particular transcript compared to the other ones I've read is that this one was by far the most heavily redacted. I would say almost half of Susan Rice's testimony is redacted. A lot of stuff in there is just read it out. It's just all read. And that's a bummer, because there was a lot of good questions I would like to have heard her answer. But it's all read. You can't tell what she said. But I like the questions that Gowdy was asking. Another thing I noticed, besides the hostile nature of the questions and answers between Gowdy and Rice, was that whenever Gowdy would ask a question, Susan Rice would give these very, very lengthy answers. Very lengthy answers. There's a lot of bullshit that she would throw in. And I noticed that whenever she was being questioned by Schiff or one of the Democrats, her answers were relatively quick and concise, and they were basically to follow along the fake Russian narrative, which is what Schiff was pushing and what Rice was happy to go along with. They were set-up questions, basically, by Schiff to continue pushing the fake Russian narrative. Rice was more than happy to play along with Schiff, and Swallowwell also asked questions as well. And there was one other Democrat. But yeah, there was definitely some pretty heated exchanges back and forth between Rice and Gowdy, and I think he was getting upset with her giving him these really, really long answers and then not really answering the question he asked. He would ask a question, and what he would get is literally like a monologue, but she never really would address the question. And you'll also notice every single time in the interview that Rice answers a question, somewhere in her answer is always, well, none of her answers are for sure. They're all, well, as best as I can tell, as best as I can remember, don't quote me on this, but as much as I recall, or I don't recall, or I don't remember, all that. I mean, total amnesia. So she was what I would consider a very hostile and difficult witness to interview, because she didn't seem to remember much until she wanted to go off on a very long monologue, and then she seems to have command of many, many details from 3 years ago. But a simple question with a simple answer, oh, geez, I can't remember. It's been too long. So it was pretty obvious that she was having selective memory loss. Pretty obvious that she didn't want to answer certain questions. And pretty obvious that she did not want to go on the record stating anything as a fact. Everything was as best as I can recall, or if I can remember, or that type of thing. So pretty much the same thing that you see with all the Democratic witnesses. They don't give straightforward answers. Everything is, they can't remember. They don't want, I can't be 100% sure. I mean, it's all this type of stuff, dancing around. So you're going to get a lot of that. But let's go ahead and cover some of the things that we were able to learn from her interview. Unfortunately, so much of the good stuff was blacked out, or redded out, I should say. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the things she did say. Well, Trey Gowdy was pressing her. He started right off with the FISA. He started right off with the unmaskings. So he started right off from point one with unmaskings. And he kept getting interrupted in the unmasking. As he was asking his questions on unmasking, he continuously got interrupted by Rumler, and he got these really long answers from Rice with a bunch of background of details and stuff that never really directly answered his question. So he would have to ask it again. And it got pretty hostile at some point. So Susan Rice, after all of that, Susan Rice eventually gets down to answering the question, and she eventually does admit, or says, when Trey Gowdy asks her if she's ever shared any information that she's obtained from an unmasked conversation, and she told Trey Gowdy that she never shared unmasked info with the media. She never shared unmasked info with the media. That's what she said under oath. She was then asked, do you recall ever requesting somebody to be unmasked on behalf of somebody else? And she said, no, I don't recall such a thing. She was asked, were any of your unmaskings ever used for political purposes or shared with a political ally? And she said, absolutely not. Were any of your unmaskings ever used for political purposes? She said, absolutely not. She was asked, do you know if the Obama administration sought to broadly disseminate this information across the government? She answered, I am not aware of that. Of course, we saw Evelyn Farkanis go on TV and describe exactly Obama doing exactly that. Loretta Lynch and Clapper signed off on it, allowing him to share classified information all across the government. And the information they were sharing was about Trump and his campaign and their alleged collusion with Russia. That's what was shared all across the government. Yet here's Susan Rice. Do you know if the Obama administration sought to broadly disseminate this information across the government? And she said, I am not aware of that. Susan Rice said, I don't recall intelligence that I would consider evidence to that effect that I saw prior of Donald Trump conspiring with Russia or colluding or coordinating for that matter. So there she is, like all the rest, admitting to Trey Gowdy that she didn't recall any intelligence that she would consider evidence that would have been evidence of Trump conspiring with Russia or colluding or coordinating. Then she was asked if there were anyone in the Trump campaign who might have been conspiring with Russia, colluding or coordinating, or if she had ever received any intelligence that would have suggested that. At which point, Rice commented, potentially. Potentially. And then there was a bunch of redacted stuff, and then down below it, at the bottom of the paragraph, she mentions Michael Flynn and Carter Page, and then says that she knew that from it being reported in the press. So she's National Security Advisor. She's saying that she wasn't aware of any evidence or intelligence that would suggest that Michael Flynn or Carter Page were colluding, conspiring, coordinating with Russians until she heard it reported in the press. She's the National Security Advisor. Someone leaked that to the press. So she's telling us that someone fairly high up who would have this information, that maybe Flynn and Carter Page were in some way colluding with Russians, they would leak it to the press, but the National Security Advisor wouldn't know about something like that. Well, there's a couple possibilities there. One is that she's lying. The other is the fact that there was no intelligence or anything that could be considered evidence that Flynn and Carter Page were colluding or whatever with the Russians. In which case, somebody just leaked it out there just to damage Trump. Or provide a media hook for the FBI to investigate and start questioning people. Remember, Peter's been stroking us, looking at those media leaks and saying, well, now that we got the media leaks out there, that gives us good cause to start interviewing people. Which is exactly what they did. Susan Rice said that she first heard of Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election in June. She said after media reports, that was following media reports after the hack of the DNC. And by the way, throughout the entire interview, she is 100% still pushing the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. She's still pushing especially the Russia hacked the DNC. She's still 100% all over that. 100% that WikiLeaks was involved with Russia and maybe someone in the Trump campaign. 100% on board with that. The whole 9 yards. The entire Russia hoax, she runs the whole line throughout the entire interview. That's her point of view. She's responding to everything as if the Russia hoax were true. That WikiLeaks was involved with Russia. That Trump was coordinating with WikiLeaks and Russians and whatever. She runs that whole narrative and answers every question as if that's a factual, proven thing, as if there's no doubt. She even makes that sort of comment several times that, well, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that we know that the Russians meddled in the election and that WikiLeaks was involved and they hacked the DNC and gave it to WikiLeaks, and the only thing we really didn't know was Trump people involved in that, and blah, 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 blah. Of course, we now know from the testimony of the two top guys at CrowdStrike that they could not say for certain whether or not the Russians hacked the DNC. There really is no evidence that the Russians hacked the DNC. Didn't stop Susan Rice, though, from continuing to run that narrative throughout the questioning. And unfortunately, nobody actually even called her on that. They just let her babble on about all that. I would have called her on it, but no one else did. Rice says that she met the first week of August to discuss Russian interference. First week of August. To discuss Russian interference with the president, senior national security officials, intelligence leaders, the FBI, the Attorney General, Rice's two deputies, Lisa Monaco and Avril Haines, and Jay Johnson of the Department of Homeland Security. We're all in this meeting in the first week of August. She said that they met again a day or two later, the same group, to discuss Russian interference in the election. And we know what they were really talking about. That's like code. Russian interference in the election. What that really meant was, how do we frame up Trump as being part of the so-called Russia hacking the DNC, coordinated with WikiLeaks, the false narrative. How do we put Trump into the false narrative? That's what they were really talking about. How Trump fits into that narrative. Because remember, it's the first week of August. What's key about that? What happened on the last day of July? They open Crossfire Hurricane. Hillary gets exonerated, then they open Crossfire Hurricane. And you know what? The next day, they're having a meeting in the Oval Office with all these people. She says they met again 1 or 2 days later. Then she said they met again over the next days and weeks. Became like a regular sort of meeting to discuss all of this. And she said it was from all of that is what led Obama to request from the intelligence chiefs the IC assessment, the Intelligence Community Assessment. The Intelligence Community Assessment came out of these early meetings in August. And what did the Intelligence Community Assessment try to claim? That Russia was working on behalf of Trump to try to help get Trump elected and to stop Hillary, to defeat Hillary. She points out that also in August, John Brennan, Mr. Potato Head, briefed the Gang of Eight. Well, that's news to Trey Gowdy. Because apparently he didn't get the same briefing everyone else got. But it was in August when Brennan called Harry Reid and dropped all this stuff on him. Stuff right out of the Steele dossier, which Brennan claims he didn't see until, December? Yet in August, he's telling Harry Reid about it. And Harry Reid contacts Comey twice, panicked, saying, hey, you need to investigate this. Susan Rice also says that during the transition period, she briefed General McMaster for 12 hours on the Russia situation. That was during the transition period. What do you think Susan Rice was telling McMaster? Knew he was dirty from day one. And he was a leaker and a liar. Then they get into some really heated discussions, a lot of it redacted, and they're talking about it's kind of difficult to tell exactly what they're talking about because so much of it's redacted, but essentially the gist that I get of it based on her answers, what part of her answers and what part of the questions I could actually see that weren't redacted, was that they're discussing what it was, what things there were there, what evidence or surveillance or intelligence was there that prompted the interest in looking into certain members of the Trump campaign having possible connections to Russia or working with Russia, and specifically the president himself, Donald Trump, who was then candidate Trump. And Susan Rice basically says what we've heard McCabe say as the reason why they took seriously that Trump may be colluding with Russia. She said it was Trump praising Putin, talking about how much he admires him and how great relations were going to be, and that gave me pause. Also, Trump praising WikiLeaks and telling the Russians to hack Hillary's emails. Now we know that's a bunch of bullshit. Certainly Trump did want to have good relations with Russia. He made that perfectly clear, not in secret, not in a secret meeting. He said it to the whole world. I would like to have better relations with Russia. When he praised WikiLeaks, he was praising WikiLeaks for releasing the emails which showed that the Clinton campaign and the media were cheating Bernie. And the Podesta emails were a little wild themselves and also proved that they were cheating Bernie. And that's what Trump was talking about. Trump never suggested to WikiLeaks that they hack Hillary's server. And he never suggested that the Russians should hack Hillary's server. He was making a joke. And he said, well, Russia, if you got Hillary's emails, sure love to see them, because no one else can find them. She bleach bitted them all. So if you got them, we'd sure like to see them. Now, if you're a serious person, you're the National Security Advisor, and you say that these things are what made you decide that, yeah, it'd be a good idea to investigate, that's pretty weak. Very weak. No serious person is going to believe that. Rice said that she didn't know, not formally, or that she wasn't formally aware that there was an FBI investigation at any point during her time as National Security Advisor. She's talking about Operation Crossfire Hurricane. She's saying that she did not know, and then she said, well, I didn't know, or I was not formally aware. Formally aware that there was an FBI investigation at any point during my time as National Security Advisor. Do you believe that? Do you believe that Susan Rice didn't know about Operation Crossfire Hurricane? She said that she doesn't have any knowledge of anything related to Director Comey's decision about how to approach the Clinton email investigation. Nothing. No knowledge of anything related to Director Comey's decision about how to approach the Clinton email investigation. She admits to knowing about the investigation into Manafort, Page, and Stone. So she knows about an investigation that they're investigating Manafort, Page, and Stone. But she previously said that she wasn't aware of, I guess she was talking about Crossfire Hurricane. But wasn't Manafort, Page, and Stone, or certainly Manafort and Page, part of the Steele information? And I assume Stone as well. So it's almost like she's drawing a difference between, yeah, I knew about investigations into these people, but I didn't know about Crossfire Hurricane. So what, they didn't tell her the name of the investigation that she knew about? It's a little sketchy. That point probably was clarified, but it was probably redacted and I couldn't see it. She says she has no specific recall of unmasking requests. She said, I'm sure that I probably asked for identities related to Russia. She had a lot of trouble with the questions about unmasking. She said she's not aware of anyone that had disseminated classified information to an unauthorized consumer. And she says, if I would have known, I would have reported it. Over 100 leaks in the first 100 days. And she didn't know about any of them. If she did, she'd have reported it. Not aware of any unlawful intelligence collection on a U.S. citizen during my time in the Obama administration. Not aware of any unlawful intelligence collection on a U.S. citizen during my time in the Obama administration. She says that Obama never tapped President or candidate Trump's phones during the campaign, transition, or at any other time, to her knowledge. Obama never tapped President or candidate Trump's phones during the campaign or transition, or at any other time, to her knowledge. She was asked how she would describe the integrity of Director Comey's work product. The integrity of Director Comey's work product from her observations. And her observation was, Comey had unquestioned integrity. Susan Rice saying that Comey had unquestioned integrity. Alrighty. And of course we have the bug-eyed fool, Adam Schiff. Story about him in the Washington Examiner. He's kind of hitting the media circuit, and he appears to be very, very nervous, according to Jerry Dunleavy. Very nervous, and he's not happy about being kept in the dark about the Durham investigation. Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure of all people in the world you want to keep in the dark about any investigation, it will be the bug-eyed fool. He'd leak it all. They're not going to tell him a damn thing about the Durham investigation, and that's making him pretty nervous. And of course we have Rick Grinnell saying that there are documents that he hopes will come out that will show that there were people in the intel community who said, quote, this doesn't add up, quote, this is not something we should rely on. Talking about, of course, they're talking about Russia trying to help Trump in the 2020 elections. This is when they were trying to put together the ICA. And Brennan wanted to make the argument that the Russians were trying to help Trump. And these intelligence officials were saying that's not 100% true. We have other evidence in the contrary. In fact, the complete opposite. Brennan canceled them all out and put it in there anyway. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. Be safe. Bye.